Here you go. Yeah, be careful.
Okay, screenplay idea.
Mine.
Two women go on a crime spree. They're leaving town, both leaving behind their jobs and families. They kill a guy, rob a store, get hooked up with a young guy, kill themselves, live forever. So that was that.
Will you take care of this gun?
What in the hell did you bring that for?
Oh, come on. Psycho killers or bears or snakes?
I don't like what I see now. My life, what I see now.
By the time I got the idea to do this, I just wanted to write it. I didn't have any aspiration beyond finishing it. But while I was writing it, I felt so strongly that something was coming through me. And it felt like it had a life of its own. I would wake up in the middle of the night and write a scene. Just boom, there it would be. When I first started, I didn't know the characters' names yet. And I was just like, I'm going to just start writing a scene and see what happens. I knew I wanted them to have like old time names, you know, very pedestrian, kind of not flashy names. For the first page that I was handwriting it, I was calling them Thelma and Velma. Then I turned the page. I literally heard the character say, "My name's Louise." And I was like, okay, Louise. And I just kept writing. I mean, it's a weird thing to say it was a divinely inspired thing, but in a certain way, it really was. It wasn't me sitting around going, what can I write that's going to really codify the feelings that women are out here having? And I wasn't doing that. It just, there it was. I always feel like I write Southern women because it's the easiest thing for me. I grew up reading Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor and Willa Cather. And, you know, I think I just wrote what I felt I could authentically write. I just felt like that is a place where there's a certain expectation for what women are. It's like everything will be fine if you understand that we all know what your place is, and no matter what you're doing, you stay within those lines.
I haven't seen a place like this since I left Texas.
Isn't this fun?
I grew up in Kentucky, and I don't know if there's a way to say it any more clearly than it is a place that a lot of really bad stuff goes down with a lot of smiles on people's faces.
You bothering these poor girls?
Hell no, I was just being friendly.
Well, it's a good thing they're not all as friendly as you.
It really makes you realize you don't know people. Like you don't know what a person contains. And so what I do when I write, or what I try to do, is I try to start out characters in a place where you think you know them.
Thelma, what are you doing?
Smoking?
And then I just like to peel the layers back.
Hey, I'm Louise.
Because I think we do that in society. We just make assumptions about people that have nothing to do with who they really are. And especially women. And there's all these rules of what you're supposed to be and look like. You know, I would see these women that had on so much makeup that you thought, wow, if they didn't have that on, I wouldn't be able to identify them. It's a mask. Louise actually wore a uniform. By the time she had been through what she'd been through, she worked nights because she didn't want to be home by herself. So she worked in a place that she felt safe. And, you know, her whole life was kind of getting smaller and smaller. And it was because there was a part of her that was so closed off that she was actually shutting down. A part of her had been so damaged that if we had started the movie and Thelma had gotten in the car and said, I've got a great idea. Why don't we drive to the Grand Canyon and just go? Louise probably could have wrapped her mind around it because there wasn't a way for her to really get past what had happened to her. And so the makeup she wore was to hide her face so that you couldn't really tell what she looked like. And that was something that I thought was really important. Pam Tillis and I met when I was waitressing at a club in Nashville called the Exit Inn. And she was singing that night. And, you know, every night there would be a waitress that was assigned to the talent. And that night I was assigned to her. And as soon as we met, it was like, oh, there you are. We were friends immediately. And we stayed friends. She was very different than me, but we were soulmates. We had a lot of really, really great and wild times when we were young. And we would be driving around like two crazy women all night long. out partying, having fun, playing music, and, you know, that bond. And that feeling of when we were in the car and I was always driving, we had our own world. And so that very strongly influenced the writing of this.
Fill her up.
And I just felt like, you know, nobody was making movies that were exciting to me as a female. I kind of figured out narrative storytelling by, of course, I watched a lot of films. I was a big film noir buff. Out of the Past, I think, is a masterpiece. I just love that film. And I think the thing that draws me to noir is the female characters are as flawed as the men. They're as interesting as the men. They're as driven as the men. They're equal on every level. They're not just there to propel the male character. They have their own story. They have their own drives and dreams. I've always envisioned Thelma and Louise as best friends since childhood. Like I said, the whole story came crashing down. And so even when I hadn't formed the scenes, I understood that there were going to be these events that I had not yet fully fleshed out.
I think we ought to tell the police.
Tell him what, Thelma? Just what do you think we should tell him, huh?
I always knew that there was going to be this attempted rape, but I didn't know what Louise had done in Texas. And so I had to figure that out. And so I had her whole backstory. She worked at a front desk of a high-rise. So when you walk in and there's those gigantic desks and she's wearing her blazer with her name tag, and she's seen women who are lawyers, who work in the oil industry, you know, she was seeing women that she had never seen before. And then I had to come up with her whole backstory for what happened to her.
Hey, now, look, I'm warning you. Just drop it. I'm not going to talk about that. You understand? Yeah.
I think giving actors as much information as you can helps them realize the character in the way that you're hoping that they will be able to realize it. There's a handoff that happens when you write a character and an actor takes it over. And so to write all the things, the little things that will help them understand who they are, you know, and a line like Louise is thinking about another pair of socks tells you that this is a person who's got a very ordered way of thinking about the world, whereas Thelma has no idea what she might need. I just find it fascinating to share the details of a character with the actors. Thelma and Daryl met in high school. You know, he was probably a year or two ahead of her. She didn't go to college, and they finally married because that's what she thought she was supposed to do. And her life was rather uncomplicated, except that she married this guy who was kind of a horse's ass.
It's a good thing you're not regional manager. And I am.
She didn't really know that there was something else she could be. And so the whole thing of her just wanting to get out of the house and have fun seemed like so little to ask.
What happened to your hair?
Nothing. Got messed up.
Thelma, what's wrong with you?
Nothing. Why? Do I seem different?
Well, now you mention it, yeah, you seem like you're crazy or you're on drugs.
Well, I'm not on drugs, but I might be crazy.
Gina especially inhabited that character in a way that was so exactly how I imagined. She imbued every single word with exactly the meaning that I had intended. That's a rare experience for a writer. In fact, it almost never happens. It's one of the most satisfying things that I've ever experienced because I could say it and it would come right out of her mouth.
Something's like crossed over in me, and I can't go back.
She just became Thelma. She knew a lot going in. You know, we had talked for hours and hours and hours. And so, aside from being a great actress, I think she was loaded with all the information that she was going to need to play this woman. I spoke with Elizabeth McBride early on, and we had long talks about who they were, what they wore, where they came from. And she perfectly outfitted them for that. I mean, again, it was, let's let them lose the trappings of their uniforms. Let's let all that peel away and get them down to what they would need to be wearing. So I had made a tape because that was our platform at the time of 18 songs that I felt kind of explained the feeling of different moments in the screenplay. And I actually think there were times that I wrote them into the screenplay. Like the B.B. King song, Better Not Look Down, Aretha Franklin, Save Me, and the song that they're singing, It Could Have Been Anything That You Wanted To. You know, a lot of old songs, because I felt like those were the songs that Thelma and Louise had listened to when they were in high school, when they were growing up.
It's okay.
There's a Pam song in there.
It's on the nightstand.
I played a lot of songs with Ridley so that he could feel the joy of the women, the sense of fun that they inhabited. They had had really crazy times when they were young, you know, when they were wild and free. And then Louise goes off to try to discover what she's supposed to be. And Thelma's left alone, and she ends up marrying Daryl.
So this is all my fault, is it?
The song I Don't Want to Play House, you know, wasn't on my tape, but I thought it was a perfect choice. I feel like I just knew so much about where they came from, what they listened to, what kind of toothpaste they used, everything. While I was writing, there was one woman that I would share pages with, and really nobody else. I didn't tell anybody I was working on a screenplay. Everybody in the world was working on a screenplay. And I knew that if I got one word of negative feedback, that I wouldn't be able to finish it. So when I finished it, I gave it to my friend Amanda Temple, because I wanted her to produce it for me to direct. And, you know, the whole idea was mad. I'd never written anything. You know, there was no reason to think that I was going to like hand her a screenplay that would then go on to win an Academy Award. That was just the last thing on anybody's radar. And so I gave it to her, and I nervously waited for her to call me. And a couple days later she did, and she was just beside herself. And so we started trying to get the money together. Diane Cairns was my first agent. I didn't even really know what that meant, other than, you know, they were going to make a deal for me, and getting any movie made is almost impossible. Becky Pollock was the person who first championed the script, got it to Alan Ladd. And so the idea that this thing was happening as quickly as it was, this film always felt like it had a life of its own, like there was an engine behind it. But I didn't have any doubt that it was going to make it to the screen. I was going to make it one way or another, whether with Ridley or whatever. I wasn't going to stop until the film was made. But I'm very happy with the job that Ridley did.
Oh, shit! Jimmy! Hey, stranger! What in the world are you doing here?
Ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies.
Good answer. Same goes double for me.
I think there are a lot of British, European filmmakers that really have a view of America that's good for us to see. It's almost like they see it in a way that's more idealized, but also they see the grit, they see all the dirt, they romanticize it along with us, I think, and for us. And so, you know, there was very much a part of this movie that I expected to do that. The American West is so beautiful and expansive. I was in love with the West at that particular time. And in fact, I had been working on a Estee Lauder commercial once in Monument Valley, which was the first time I had been there. And I had to pick up all the camera equipment at the airport and drive it through Monument Valley on a full moon night. And it was just one of the most exquisite things I've ever seen. And the feeling that came along with it was so beautiful that I wanted to get it into a movie. I mean, I didn't even know I was going to write Thelma and Louise. I just knew that I was being imprinted with something that was going to affect me for a long, long time. I wanted the landscape around them to feel uncharted somehow, that they were in a dream world, that they were on a quest, and Ridley Scott achieved that. When you're out there, you know, you understand how insignificant you are. You're just a little speck in the desert. You're just another grain of sand. And there's a freedom that comes with that. You come to another level of consciousness.
You awake? Guess you could call it that. My eyes are open.
Me too. I feel awake.
Good.
That part of the movie where she says, "Do you feel awake?" I feel awake. I feel like you go through your daily life and there's almost a veil or a cloud, but you're not noticing everything. There's not the kind of mindfulness when you realize, oh, wow, I'm out here and there's nothing else. And there's just all this life and all this death and all this beauty. And, it just kind of lets you let go of all your expectations of who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. And I wanted those women to experience the fullness of that.
Do you think I've lived my life all wrong?
I'm not sure I could have survived seeing the test endings because I would have just been in a rage, I'm sure, because there was no question to me. And I don't think Ridley really had a question either. I think he felt like it was the correct ending, and I think he had to do something to placate the studio. But I don't think I would have survived if they had not shot that ending. It just was the reason to make the movie. It's the whole point. When the movie came out, there were just a slew of very negative reviews that called it man-hating and dangerous and all kinds of things that were just preposterous. I am not a man-hater. I didn't think there was anything in the film that was man-hating. I think films have villains. I've said a million times, if you want to talk about negative representations of men, then you also have to talk to Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and Quentin Tarantino, because the men that they represent are monsters. They're not all monsters, but a lot of them are, and they're not completely monsters, but they mostly are. So I didn't want to hear it. It wasn't what the film was about. And is it impossible for you to relate to the protagonists of the film just because they're female? And for a lot of men, it was. And, they would say, well, the men just were kind of like secondary characters. And I would say, well, now you know how women feel when they go to the movies most of the time. And I took great offense at the fact that I wrote a movie where one guy dies who kind of had it coming. But the main character took responsibility for it, felt horrible about it, wasn't able to go on with her own life because of what she'd done. I was just like, no, I'm sorry. You've just got it all wrong. I wanted to continue to write about women, but for my next project, which was a movie called Something to Talk About, a title that I to this day can't stand, I wanted to do something that didn't have guns, that all the action turned on emotion, because a gun is such an easy thing. And in the movie, when Louise shoots the guy, I intended it to be seen as a horrible mistake. I gave all the emotional rationale for it. I had no idea that people would cheer. I thought they would be stunned into silence. I thought they would all go, oh no. And they didn't do that. They cheered. And they cheered because they were fed up with men behaving that way. And they were happy to see this guy take a bullet. And that was a shocking moment for me. The first time I heard the audience cheer, my heart sank. It just shows you how we look at violence in this country and retribution.
And I'm not sorry that son of a bitch is dead. I'm just sorry it was you that did it, not me.
The evolution of the film is something that continues to mystify me in a certain way, because I was hoping that it would be irrelevant 30 years later, that, behavior would have changed and it wouldn't be such a relatable thing. But society has not progressed at the rate of speed that we had hoped. So, it continues to resonate, and it somehow manages to kind of stay in the same place that it was when it came out. When people see it, they seem to feel like it's very relevant.
I always wanted to travel. I just never got the opportunity.
You got it now.